Luther King, I have a dream. I have a dream for a reimagined, re-energized, and rejuvenated NSSC administration, and by extension, a national education system that we can all be proud of. Along with the support of my capable executives, the team at the ministry, along with all other stakeholders, we will easily make this dream a reality. Having served as a local council executive and then regional VP, I would have worked tirelessly within our region to execute several projects, which would make me now equipped and certified to offer myself for the position of national president for the National Secondary Students Council under the campaign, using what is right with the Students Council to fix what is wrong within our schools. I plan to achieve this very simple manifesto with a very simple agenda. Many of us should know it. It's in every song, and it's the first thing we learn in schools, the ABC. Now, every good house has an even better foundation, and every successful organization has to have a formulated framework with a strategic placement of initiatives involved. Therefore, the first issue I plan to tackle is administration. I plan to publish a calendar of events at the beginning of the term on all our social media platforms. Therefore, our schools will be kept up to date and will be required to plan ahead of time for our functions. I will also assign VPs added responsibilities because in my years of a regional officer, I realized that there's a heavy strain on the national executive, and the giving VPs individual posts such as policy and planning, health in schools, this will lessen that burden. Finally, I plan to implement a We Report section, which is an anonymous reporting mechanism, which will allow for individual counselors and schools who wish to remain unidentified to whether they want to report a counselor or an issue that they need to speak about. Secondly, B, branding. NSSC, they have a buzz. It has been a long time plan of past executive members and even those now to have the creation of a store which sells merchandise products for resale. This stems from shirts to cups to mugs. I plan to implement this initiative within my first 100 days under the name Rep NSSC Brand for Me. And the funds would go towards our NSSC bursary, which would be disbursed at the end of the year. Additionally, under branding, we plan to partner with some of the big names in Jamaica. Therefore, the NSSC's brand, which is a spectacular brand, would be more recognized and more visible locally and abroad. C, cohesion. We've spoken about it several times, but what have we done to implement changes towards this? If elected national president, I plan to actually bridge the gap between local, regional, and national executives through courtesy calls done in all 7 regions almost every other month, as well as spontaneous drop-ins at meetings. This will lead to spectacular local council empowerment. When I was running for regional vice president, I recall a constituent asked, Mr. Hall, if you win, what will you do for our colleagues in less than ideal circumstances? I told them my mantra, my life mantra in everything I do. If I go one day without living and I'm unable to help someone, is my life worth living? Therefore, this will lead to me creating the National Secondary Students Council Service Projects Core, which will see us executing service projects in all regions every single month. I also plan to keep national socials, which will have the entire councils and members of our local councils coming together to bond as one. Now, the most important asset in any country is its human resources, and the future of our human resources is our youth. Therefore, the investment and protection of these resources is of utmost importance. If elected national president of the National Secondary Students Council, I plan to enhance, empower, and ignite our students up to their full potential. This will lead to a membership enhancement fund, as we spoke about earlier, and it will also help with the fiscal empowerment of our students, and also a mentorship program which will see students receiving help in both mental health aspects as well as education. Finally, financial stability. Who doesn't love money? I know I do. If elected president, I plan to ensure economic support for all students once we have it, through scholarships and bursaries and the membership enhancement fund. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if it hasn't become abundantly clear, my vision is your vision. These plans are your plans. Therefore, don't vote for me, vote for you. A vote for me is an investment in you and your future and our education system. And remember, we're going to use what is right about Students' Council to fix what is wrong within our schools. Rise to the prosperous call and vote for Hall.
A pleasant day, everyone. My name is Ricardo Hall. I attend the Cedar Academy, and I'm vying for the position of president for the National Secondary Students' Council. My mother died before I learned how to walk. Her death taken a toll on my father. She smoked and drank heavily. When I was around 8 or 9, my father too passed. I was then placed in a boys' home where I found making friends, fitting in, and even doing schoolwork extremely difficult. In spite of all this, I am grateful for the few that try to assist me. In the event that you're wondering, this is not my story, but it is the experience of one of our peers. This testimony highlights that more should and could be done to assist regular students. With that, my name is Ricardo Hall, and I'm vying for the position of president of the National Secondary Students' Council. Holding a multiplicity of leadership positions at the Cedar Academy, as well as my church, I am no stranger to governance. If elected as your president for the upcoming academic year, I pledge to be led by the grace of God to accomplish these 3 essential plans. They are, primarily, the eradication of educational inequality. See, some schools experience the luxury of having a stable internet connection. However, some schools have little to no internet connectivity. And then schools in the urban areas have a plethora of transportation options, be it taxis, be it buses, even private vehicles. However, some schools in the rural areas have little to no transportation. And I ask, does this sound fair? I believe it is my duty to highlight these problems and present feasible solutions, such as employing service providers to both strengthen their signal in rural areas and reduce the cost of data plans to aid in the educational processes. Moreover, medical practitioners say that COVID-19 will still be here until 2023, if not later. It is therefore impossible for our peers to social distance while traveling to and from school. Thus, leading out the appeal to the Ministry of Transportation as an organization, no, better yet, as a union, we can petition that more public transportation are situated in these areas. The next essential plan is the heightened promotion of revision workshops. As an organization that postulates that we are the voice for students, much more can be done as it relates to ensuring that students, specifically those sitting external examinations, are aware of revision sessions being put on by our organization and the ministry. Also, I will implore that there be a blended approach to facilitate those without internet connectivity. Furthermore, the need for a ministry-certified academic aid initiative. There are students who struggle academically and are occasionally forgotten. The plan requires members of the NSSC to lead homework and revision sessions with our struggling peers, specifically those sitting external examinations. In turn, while our peers become more proficient, those who lead out upon the completion of a set amount of hours would receive certificates recognized by the NCC and the Ministry of Education so that the experience garnered could be placed on resumes. It is my hope that this plan, when implemented, will leave no student behind. With all this being said, my name is Ricardo Hall, and for you, I understand. For you, I deliver. I thank you.
Thank you both. We have now reached to the question and answer segment of today's proceedings. In this section, you'll be getting 2 questions. You'll answer in the order in which you read your manifesto. Your first question: what is the first order of business that will be executed should you be the next president?
Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson, for that question. Well, the first order of business, I believe, is getting our students connected to some form of class. So whether it is physical school or online school, the digital divide that we would have been advocating about so much last year is definitely an issue. And our first order of business, is getting our students connected to a classroom, whether it be virtual or physical, or the provision of resources for them to access this information.
Mr. Ricardo Hall?
It was stated in the news, I believe, a week ago that the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information plans to reopen schools coming September. Now, the first order of business is to eradicate educational inequality. The fact is, schools do not have the capability nor the capacity to hold all their students. So some students will be taken care of online, while some will be taken care of face to face. Now, schools without internet connectivity will have a handful, will have a task on their hands, because if they have no internet connectivity, specifically those sitting external examinations won't be able to fully grasp the content. And also, to get students to school safely and on time, there must be measures put in place to ensure that enough public transportation are available to take the students from their homes or from their bus stops straight to school.
Thank you both. Your second and final question for this section: what do you understand by the term child rights?
Thank you again, Ms. Robinson, for that question. Well, you say child rights is a very broad topic, and I think we often misconstrue its literal meaning. But I think we can separate the 2 terms, and it is any provision or any necessity or basic need that a child is to be given, that a child is due. So just like the rights in the workplace and the different acts that speak toward different rights. So any provision or opportunity or thing that belongs to our children that they indeed deserve.
Mr. Ricardo Hall?
Thank you. When I hear the term child right, I believe it means any act of necessity that a child is provided in order to allow their quality of life to be substantial. So what I mean by that is anything that a child should have to ensure that their quality of life, the way they live, is comfortable and reasonable.
Thank you both. We are now at the debate section. Please remember to use the raise hand feature or your physical hand to indicate when it is that you would like to answer a question. Remember that you have the right to remain silent, the right to answer once, and the right to counteract once. Were those instructions clear, and are you ready?
Yes.
Your first debate question. The pandemic has resulted in significant learning loss amongst the students in Jamaica. Identify one initiative you would institute to fill this learning gap and why. Any takers? Mr. Ricardo Hall, go right ahead.
Thank you for that question. As stated in my manifesto, the last point was the Ministry Certified Academic Aid Initiative. Now, the initiative will allow members of the NSSE to help those students in their region or even in their school who are struggling academically, to allow them to become more proficient, so more knowledgeable, more adept, more comfortable with a specific topic, so that when they go into exams, they can answer the questions comfortably. Online school, I must admit, is not the easiest, But if a child or a student is given as much help as possible with the Ministry Certified Academic Aid Initiative, I am certain that the learning loss experienced will be counteracted.
Go ahead, Mr. Jamaul Hall.
Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson. Well, while I think it's important for us to hone our children and ensure that, going forward, it's also important that the learning loss is specifically targeted. So if elected NSSC president, I would, of course, invite all stakeholders, so principals, teachers, parents, and what I would suggest is that the content or the curriculums that were left out last year or that students struggled with in their penultimate year of school, this be revisited first after a diagnostic test is issued, and the results from that diagnostic test would, of course, inform us as to the position of the students and then how we would proceed. So diagnostic test first, and then the revisitation of the content or the curriculum agendas that we feel were most affected.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Go right ahead, Mr. Ricardo Hall.
You made mention of revisiting the topics that were left out. All right, so we need to take into consideration why they were left out. It's not only because some students lacked internet connectivity, it's because the time was simply not there. Teachers themselves are overextended. I'm not saying that it's not possible to do the diagnostic tests, but there's no time to do that. Students know, like myself, like you, even Mr. Hall, can help others who struggle academically. That way is more effective as you have a peer relationship, and it's also more efficient, seeing that it won't take away from the teacher's time to plan lesson plans and other class activities.
Thank you. Would you like to rebut, Mr. Hall? All right, moving right along. In 2020, less than 50% of schools had an active students' council. How do you plan to tackle this issue? Go right ahead, Mr. Jamaul Hall.
Thank you so much, Ms. Robinson, for the question. Well, I think, experience could talk, because in Region 5, we also had some inactive councils. And with the strategic initiatives targeting those schools that were in impoverished areas, meeting with their principals, but most importantly, sensitizing the student councils about their role and their purpose. Oftentimes, we find that there's a disconnect in terms of what they know and versus what they should actually be doing. So sensitization of them on their roles, and also not just the principal, but the school board, and the importance under the Education Act Section 32, bringing this to light in all our schools that are inactive.
Go right ahead, Mr. Ricardo Hall.
Jamaul, you presented a very good plan. However, I'm more practical. I present something more efficient. In law, I learned that letters have a great impact. You send out a letter, it has a great impact. Simply write a letter, direct it to the schools with an inactive student council, stipulating that in accordance to the Act, the Education Act, each school should have an active student council, a representative on the board. State it, make it known unambiguously and unequivocally clear, and they will enact on it. It's simple as that.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Go right ahead, Mr. Jamaul Hall.
So I'm happy to hear that we're both law students, Mr. Hall. We share the same last name. But I don't think a letter in my year as regional VP, we did in fact send some letters and we didn't get a response. So I think the experience I have taught me that letters don't always work. Sometimes you have to go into the school community, you have to sensitize the parents even, and you have to get involved as a student leader. And if it takes me being the national president to go all the way to Chok and go into a school and say, hey, the student councils need to be alive, that is what I believe needs to be done.
Any further statements, Mr. Ricardo Hall? Go ahead.
Okay, I was asked 2 weeks ago to define a characteristic of mine, one word that defines me in its entirety, and I chose inimitable. It means so good or so unusual as to be impossible to copy. Now, I said the letter because, adults recognize letters as of great importance. But if the letters aren't being addressed, you call. If the calls aren't getting answered, you drive to the school. I'm not afraid to do that either, Mr. Hall. We have to take a hands-on approach. Sometimes a hands-on approach to get the job done, and I'm not afraid to do that.
Both gentlemen. Your final debate question. What do you think the top priority, for the National Secondary Students Council should be in the coming year? Any takers? Go ahead, Mr. Hall, Mr. J. Hall.
All right, thank you so much, Miss Robinson. Well, I think the top priority for the National Secondary Students Council, being the premier student advocates in Jamaica, is to assess strategically where our students are right now in terms of their learning loss and the digital divide, and also advise the ministry on how to go forward with an inclusive approach, not just telling us that, hey, this is what we're going to do, but including us at every step of the way, not just an informed report, but a consultative approach. So sensitization as well. Thank you for that question.
Go right ahead, Mr. Ricardo Hall.
So thank you for that question, Ms. Robinson. We need to prioritize, find the impact or the problem that straight across the board, most students are experiencing. That would be one of two things: either a lack of internet connectivity, and internet connectivity, I include devices under that, or learning loss, as you stated, Jamaul. Both actually go hand in hand. Without a device, learning at home, that's not possible. No device learning at home, I don't see how that's possible. No internet at home while having a device, learning at home still isn't possible. So the problem now is, how can we allow both issues to be answered in one go? As stated in the manifesto, the service providers could either improve or strengthen their signal in those areas where students are heavily impacted without a lack of connectivity, or they could allow a reduced cost for data plans for those who are at home with devices but have no internet.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Go right ahead, Mr. Jamaul Hall.
Excellent thing, Mr. Hall, but just one thing. Those things have actually already been approached by the National Secondary Students Council in terms of the lowering of data plans for students, and also there are zero-rate websites that students can go on to check out school. So just stating that.
Final statement by Mr. Ricardo Hall.
Okay. Are the zero rates for each service provider? No, I don't think so. Each service provider doesn't provide that. And you said that the NSSC approached it. Did you know that a vast majority of students aren't knowledgeable of those plans? Did you know that a vast majority of secondary students aren't knowledgeable of the NSSC's existence? We have to do more. Our impact has to be heavily felt, more felt. These plans that you presented, Jamaul Hall, they are effective. However, we need to take a more practical approach, a more hands-on approach, and a more efficient approach into correcting learning loss and correcting a lack of connectivity and devices.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a riveting debate. I wish you all the best in the upcoming elections.